We'll be just starting off in 5 minutes. We are waiting for the participants to join. Hello, everyone. Am I audible, Sad?
Yes, you're audible, Anshu.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our today's webinar. I am Insha Mazhar from Team Suslence, and I'll be your host for this webinar. So, before starting off, let me just tell you about the ground rules that everyone has to follow. Please make sure that your mic is muted and your camera is on because it's always a good idea to switch on the video for better interaction, right? And at the end of this webinar, there will be a Q&A session. If you have any sort of query or doubts or anything, you can just speak off or else write in the chat box and our speaker will going to address them. Feel free to ask. Moving on, we welcome 2021 with the hopes that brings a lot of positivity in our lives. It is a fact that we all want to become the best version of ourselves, right? We at Suslence, we are here to provide you with tons of soft skills, tools, and much more to help you start off this year with a lot of positivity and enthusiasm. We are introducing our flagship program that is a Certified Employability Professional CEP program, a platform that focuses on developing the most in demand skills of 21st century for young graduates such as time management, decision making, problem solving, emotional intelligence, self belief, etc., that corporates nowadays are looking for. We are here to give you the hands on experience of life projects to work upon and providing you the mentorship services for helping you to choose the right career path. At CEP, we aim at bridging the gap between academia and industry. Further on, making potential candidates looking for the job the right fit for the desired roles. Now, talking about this one. In this webinar, you will have an overview of systems thinking, what it is all about, and how it plays the role in problem solving. And now, without any further delay, I would like to introduce you all to our today's webinar speaker, Mr. Adam Walls, who is a senior consultant and business architect. And he will be going to speak on the overview of systems thinking and its role in problem solving. Besides this, let me just tell you a bit about who he is. He has an experience of over 20 years of teaching business with a variety of methods, tools, and approaches, including statistics for business leaders, Six Sigma, the reform methods, process architecture, so on and so forth. He had also written and taught the reform method to over 400 candidates in more than 15 countries across Asia and Europe. And he is a very experienced person at explaining complex concepts to all type of students, from beginners to experts, from call center agents to CEOs of large consultancies. Adam is also an expert in his field of applying systems thinking to resolve many complex and difficult business problems for some of the world's leading companies. So without dealing much, let me just ask Mr. Adam Walls to carry forward this session. Over to you, sir.
Now it works. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you and we'll crack on because we have a lot to get through, as you can imagine. Okay. Okay, it's my intention to talk you through system thinking and from a very, very high level. As you'll see, it's a very, very big subject and there's no chance in the time we have to go into any depth, but certainly by the end of this, you should have a good overview of what we mean by system thinking. So I always start with these two quotes because this is really about thinking. And a lot of people are looking for a methodology, like a process to follow. System thinking is definitely not that. It's a way of thinking. And the first quote really is about your thinking about yourself. To be assertive is to decide for yourself and to trust that there is enough, that you are enough. Now, one of the things that system thinkers get is a lot of resistance because we're not sure that people get it. And to a lot of people, what we do is kind of black magic, and so it can create some friction. Now, you have to believe that you're enough, really, to deal with that friction. Now, the other quote from George Bernard Shaw about all progress depends on unreasonable people, be unreasonable. A lot of system thinkers come across as being quite unreasonable. And I think that might be a personality trait of system thinkers. Maybe, we shall see. But I always like to start with those quotes. So to position this, so you understand it is about thinking and it's not about methods. I'm not going to teach you a process. What I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss with you the approaches, if you like. So there's a chap called Kenneth Balding back in, sorry, it's not very helpful, this screen, who wrote something called the general system theory. And the general system theory really covered all systems. Now, a system, for the sake of argument, is anything that has two or more bits that interact and create an outcome. And what he did was he came up with this, what he called skeleton for science, which is a hierarchy of systems. So level one would be a bridge, for example, something that just sits there and has a function. but doesn't really interact with its environment too much, but is used. The second level is what we call clockwork, something predetermined motion. Now, an awful lot of process work that we do in business works at this level. It's all about cause and effect and what we call determinism. The third level is control mechanisms, this idea that we have an interaction where things can control the interaction between the elements. Things like thermostats, things like homeostasis, where organizations reach a level of equilibrium. I'll keep omitting these people. Okay, the fourth one is open systems. Open systems interact with their environment freely and have porous borders, and things like cells do that. The fifth one, generic social systems like plants, where you have a society of cells cooperating with each other, like a division of labor. And then the sixth one is animals with nervous systems and self-awareness. You can see the progression in complexity. The seventh one is humans, self-conscious knowledge and language. And then the eighth one is this idea of humans working together with roles and communications and values, family groups and families, clubs and groups and teams, and this sense of belonging. And then the ninth one is this transcendental systems, the idea of God, faith, things like theta healing and spirituality. Things that don't have evidence, or are not evidence-based, but are belief-based. And so this really underpins an awful lot of system thinking, that there are these layers, and that working in one of them doesn't really give you any access to the others. Now, essentially then, there are two ways of viewing the world in system thinking terms. There's this idea that you can see a system and you can analyze it and engineer it. And it's really this mechanistic metaphor, this idea that I can map a process and process tells me what's going on, this cause and effect, the second level, if you like, of the previous slide. And this, what I call the pink view of the world, hard systems we call this. And really this really works in manufacturing context. So in a factory, you have products that come in and they're changed into other products through a series of steps which are predetermined and knowable and measurable and manageable. And you can engineer something to turn an input A into an output B. And then there's this other worldview, this green worldview, where the world is complex and messy. So for example, the idea that you can turn a caller in a call center into a successful outcome, there's an awful lot of complexity there. It's not really a set of processes you follow, because people don't necessarily follow process. People are purposeful and do what they want. And this idea that it's a complex, messy world, really that's where system thinking exists in that world, which is the other layers. As you get more and more complicated through the hierarchy, system thinking takes that into account. So we have these two concepts, this idea of closed system, and that's really the factory view of the world, that it exists within a bubble, and only the things coming in are the things you want, and then the interaction between the bits produces something you want, and that's all predetermined. And really, business a lot of the time work on this illusion that they have this closed system. You put 1,500 people into a shed, and you block out the environment around the shed, and then you have these people working, and then there's the assumption that they all work within this closed system. Now, ironically, with COVID, what happened was all of those 1,500 people in that closed system were sent to their own homes. And then suddenly what you've got to face is you have these things called open systems, that these 1,500 people are operating within their own environment, and their environment and they are exchanging matter all the time. And it's those interactions now separately that are how the business runs, and an awful lot of businesses are struggling with this. Now, Balding's level 2 deals with this idea of closed systems, and the levels 3 to 9 really are where the world works as far as system thinking is concerned. And so in a way, an awful lot of what we do in business in terms of trying to make optimal business, trying to look at productivity gains and efficiency metrics, really exists in this mechanical metaphor. So the pink worldview is the world is a machine that I can control. And the green worldview is the world is an organism that I can't control. Okay, so system thinking. Now, there have been over 30 system thinking writers in 7 categories. Now, these 7 categories really are just ways of lumping them together to say that they were all writing about this kind of thing, but effectively they're not. They're writing about a whole world of different things, because this is thinking. It's not about a method. And just to demonstrate, system thinking is also these 22 main system thinking approaches, and there may be more. And it's underpinned by another 31 principles. So this idea that, you know, I can learn system dynamics and I know about system thinking is really false. If you know about system dynamics, you only know about one of the 22 main system thinking approaches. And they all do different things, and they all have slightly different focuses. And a lot of them overlap, like a Venn diagram. But you don't need to know them all. Nobody knows them all. You might know a few. In fact, the Open University that teaches system thinking only teaches 5 of these. Now, what I've discovered is that you don't need to know them all, but as you find yourself needing to know more, then you go away and you do study, and you look into the ones that will help. And it's this curiosity, really, that an awful lot of system thinkers have, this curiosity for what I don't know. And really, an awful lot of this is about that. It's about being curious for what I don't know. Okay, so we're going to look at one of the 31 system thinking principles, which requires divergent and convergent thinking. Now, the idea of this is that, unlike analysis, where traditionally what happens in business is you're given a problem, you do some analysis, you get to what you think is a root cause, and you fix the root cause, and then the problem goes away. Of course, it doesn't. What you do then is you're dealing probably with a symptom. And the question you have to ask all analysts is, how do you know that you're dealing with the right problem? And a lot of the time, they don't. They're just dealing with the problem their manager gave them, or the problem that is causing pain. But actually, it may not be the problem. I'll give you an example. I'm called in to sort out customer service quite a lot of the time. As customer service is really the recipient of an awful lot of noise from other things failing within an organization. So I go to customer service, and the head of customer service said, my people aren't productive enough. They're causing, or that they're not dealing with the queries they're getting in a satisfactory way, and we're getting a lot more noise. Now, what happens in customer service is if you don't deal with the complaint well, it comes back again with a more upset person, and then you have to escalate it to more and more skilled people. And what I often find is when I look at where the work's coming from, it might be sales selling things that the business can't deliver, because the sales guys are incentivized to sell. And so they sell stuff, they sell anything. And once it's sold, once the customer signs, the sales guy gets paid, and they don't care anymore. They're on to their next job. And what's happening is they chuck these things over the wall into delivery, and then delivery is saying, what do you mean within a week? It's going to take a month. And then, of course, it's late, and the sales guys have set the expectation for the client that they can have it in a day or a week or a month, and it might take longer. Also, being sold things cheaper than they're actually going to cost. So an awful lot of systems integrators find this. For example, the sales sell the platform at the price the customer thinks they can afford, and by the time they've actually built it, it costs a lot more, because it's not in the sales guy's interest to tell the truth. And so all of this noise comes back through customer service. And so when customer service can't cope, often it exists somewhere else. So this idea of divergent and convergent thinking really is that to start with, before you do anything, you need to understand. Now, you get information through analysis. You get understanding through synthesis. So the first thing, having got a problem, is that you put the stuff together and you try and make the whole world view visible to you. So it's not enough to know this is the problem. You're just probably talking about a symptom. I need to know about all the interactions that happen around that problem. And once I understand all of those different elements, I've got everything out on the table. A guy called Russell Ackoff, one of the foremost writers, said, get the mess out on the table and then mess around in the mess. Try and understand what you're seeing. And then once you understand it, you can then look at doing some diagnosis. You know, where should I look? What is the most likely thing that I'm seeing here? And then you can do some analysis. So that's divergent, going out, and then convergent, going back in. And you go back in and you focus on something. And then you might decide, oh, it's not that. And you come back out and you focus on something else. And then you think, oh, no, it's not that. And then you go back out and you come back out. And so it might be iterative. If you're lucky, you find the right thing. But sometimes it might take 4 or 5 goes to find the right thing. You're looking at the place to intervene in this system, after all. What you're not trying to do is you're not trying to fix the problem. You're trying to, if anything, dissolve the problem. You're trying to make the problem not a problem at all. For example, if I go back to my previous example and say, if I went to sales and incentivized them around delivery, you know, if you sell something we can't deliver, you don't get paid. Well, maybe then the noise in customer service stops. And what I've done is I've dissolved that extra work that was coming into customer service, and we've moved it left in the process, if you like, to sales. And now sales are only selling things we can deliver. So this idea of trying to work out what the real situation is and putting things in place or taking things away to figure out how to make the thing better. Dissolving problems by intervention. So I have an example for you of a recent piece of work I did with a European country where I was asked to look at the challenge they have with burnout. Burnout, of course, is an emotional thing. So it's probably quite complicated. So the problem, are 19 non-government organizations that work across this country. And they work with communities, and it's a very well-established program. They're very successful, and one of the most successful countries at doing this, of having these community groups, which are well-sponsored, going into communities and working with the communities to deal with the local issues. Now, most of these community groups were struggling through COVID with the people, the volunteers and the people who were brought in feeling that they weren't valued and that there was an awful lot of friction being created between the organizing bodies and the people on the floor doing the work. And a lot of them were feeling that they weren't valued by the people who were paying the money, and that they weren't even sure what they were doing was a good thing. And they were facing burnout, and stress levels were very high, and they can't afford to lose these people because the people know their communities really well. And replacing somebody is not a case of just taking a cog out and replacing it with another one. These people are integral to their environments and their communities, and finding well-motivated people who are happy to give up their time to help the local communities to thrive and grow isn't as easy as you'd think. So they're very valuable resources, but they don't get paid enough. So what we did was I facilitated a session with these 19 groups, and the whole thing was over Zoom. So this is all done remotely. I facilitated a session with the 19 groups, and I asked them some questions that opened them up to discuss where their pain points were. Now, this is called an operational review, and I developed it for business. And there'll be other sessions when I'll talk about the mechanics behind how to do this. But what came out with these 89 points, and it starts with small organizations doing the best they can, don't want to put people off, ability of people from different bubbles to communicate in the same language, anthropologists, sociologists, environmental, all speak different languages. So these challenges, these operational challenges, if you like, and it ends up with all the money's maximized into groups, not me. Organizations don't manage to grow professionally, laptops, training, so they don't get the equipment they need. And disposable income level, budgets have to get budgets. I have to get a real job paying money rather than doing what I want to do, which is this. So they're not being rewarded for their time. And in here somewhere, we've got, one of them said burnout. But the reason that I was brought in the first place was because the perception of burnout. Now you've got things here like fake news, no way of telling the truth, havoc. That really was talking about the environment today, the fact that it's really difficult to know what's true and what's not true. And we dealt with that slightly differently because we obviously can't fix that. So having got all of this stuff out, the people started to feel better. There was it was a cathartic exercise for them to unburden themselves of what's bugging them, essentially. Now, obviously, this hasn't solved anything, but what it has done is it's been a confessional, if you like. It's allowed them to across all groups, to speak their truth. And what was very interesting was these 19 groups were all kind of talking about the same stuff, and they all agreed on this. There was no dissent here. Nobody thought that anybody was speaking out of line. They all celebrated each other. And there's also a negative, what we call a negative feedback loop here. That as people started to talk more truth came out, and the barriers came down. So initially they wanted to talk about the other thing, and then when people started to talk about themselves, then they can talk about themselves. So what we did was ask them to draw a system diagram of their organization, and here's 6 of them. And they're all different, although they're all kind of the same. What was inside their bubble and what was outside their bubble, and what are the different elements of their bubbles? And you can see how they differently perceived them. So this one here saw a whole bubble with lots of things within it, and this one here saw these kind of bubbles not necessarily interacting together, but all separate. And the same with this one, some overlap, but a lot of this stuff is isolated. Now, what was really interesting about this exercise was we said, can you draw one picture between you of how you all relate to each other? Now, we've got 19 community organizations, and those 19 community organizations are all doing the same thing, but they're all doing it separately. And none of them wanted to talk about working together. And this was a historical context. This was a European country that had a dictator in the past, and they'd had a revolution, and the revolution had put the people in power, and they never wanted to perceive themselves being controlled again. And it was kind of like teenagers breaking free of their parents' control in a funny sort of way. Now, what this meant was, even though they're working together, even though these people were actually friends, all of the 19 groups knew each other and were aware of each other, they didn't want to perceive themselves under any sort of organization, which was kind of interesting. So what we did was I wrote down all these 89 points onto these yellow post-its and something called Jamboard, which is a Google tool. And all of the 19 organizations started grouping these into similar type subjects. And you can see it ended up on 3 pages with 3 different titles: lack of resources, lack of strategic thinking, and collaboration challenges. And this one here, which was about now, the havoc and the no way of telling the truth, they call that the effed up context of today. In that, you know, we can't, it's just crazy, the world right now. And so what I did was I changed the color of that to something completely different, because we're not going to deal with that. We're not going to, what we're going to do is we're going to accept that it exists, and we're just going to put it to one side. So we ended up with 12 of these groups. When you cluster this stuff together, there are 12 different main drivers, if you like, or issues, or sorry, subjects. These are issues. These yellow ones are issues, and these blue ones and pink ones and green ones are subjects. Now, what I was trying to do was to work out whether or not there was a relationship between them, and what that relationship was, and whether we could find one in particular that was driving everything else. And this is a kind of a system dynamic approach to problem solving. So I put the 12 things around a clock face, and that's the other one. And we had this conversation in another session with all 19 groups. I said, does 12 o'clock drive 1 o'clock, or does 1 o'clock drive 12 o'clock? And here you see the arrow pointing backwards that says, well, 1 o'clock drives 12 o'clock. And then we went all the way around the clock face. Does this one drive this one? Does this one drive this one? And so on, until every one had been checked against every other one. And some of them, there were 2-headed arrows, that one and that one, for example. Well, that felt like emergence. It felt like, well, more of this, maybe, or less of this, positive or negative. But they drive each other. So the one with all the out arrows, well, that would be the thing that's driving everything, right? And the one with all the in arrows, well, that would be a driven thing. So I put some numbers in these boxes to indicate how many out arrows and how many in arrows and how many double-headed arrows, and then put them across a wall like this. So we can see that poor organizational culture had 9 out arrows, was driving 9 things, was driven by 2 things, and had 1 double-headed arrow. So everything on this side had more things going out, was driving more things than it was driven by. And everything on this side was driven by more things than it was driving. Now you see that burnout here, the thing I was brought in to solve, the problem, well, that's driven by 11 things. So driven by everything. This one also, struggle to engage in our communities, that you might think, well, that's a problem we need to solve. Well, is it? Or can we dissolve it by looking at why there's a problem engaging in our communities? Lack of sustainability, professional status, different communities, different needs. And you might do projects to try and fix these, but actually with this approach, you need to be focusing on this side of the line, because all of this stuff is driving all of this stuff. Poor organizational culture, lack of investment, missing architecture and mindset for collaboration, lack of strategic engagement and decision makers, missing strategic rituals, and project mentality. So this really is dealing with what? Well, it's dealing with the way that people work together. Now, if you think back to what I said, when they tried to draw a system diagram that involved all of them, they struggled. And when I say struggled, it became really, really angry, as they felt that they were being forced into organizing themselves into one organization. And that would mean somebody in charge, and that would mean hierarchy and management and all the things that they really, really didn't want. But actually not having those things, well, that starts to create some real problems. This project mentality, for example, the way that was described to me is everything's a project. So I've been in an awful lot of businesses where that's true, where there's an awful lot of project managers, and every piece of work that is sparked up as a project. Well, the problem when everything is a project is There is no learning. So you can't look at two pieces of work and say, oh, they're the same. We need to put a program together to deal with that one thing. Are there any other things that look like this? Really, you're working down in the grass in a lot of different initiatives that don't share with others. I worked in one organization where there were 230 projects going on in the same department with 230 project teams. I'm not kidding, a whole floor of project resource, all working individually of each other. And if you wanted anything done, you had to go and find out what project was dealing with it. Absolutely crazy. And this was similar. So all of these communities had projects going on, all with people doing their best, working almost against the fact that they had no organization. So what I did was I looked at this one here, poor organizational culture, and I went back to the grouping, poor organizational culture, and I took these post-its and I put them around a clock face. And I did a little exercise to work out the same again, what's driving what. Surprising we're as successful as we are isn't driving anything, but it's driven by all 7. And then I put those across the board and said, okay, so executive directors don't feel what I'm doing is relevant, is the main driver here, drives 6 things and is only driven by 1. Quality of people we can afford is poor, executive not engaged, ways of working, lack of ability to work together, right in the middle. And interestingly, that's the one that's driving that one. And so what you're facing here is a systemic problem. There is no traditional cause and effect. Yes, this stuff on here is all driven. Yes, you can say that we don't really need to address this. What we could do is we can address this, but we need to address lack of ability to work together. As much as executive directors don't feel like what I'm doing is relevant. Ways of working is driving lack of ability to work together, and ways of working is driven by executive directors don't feel what I'm doing is relevant. So we have this dynamic, this system dynamic. Now, if we go back to the other one, the main one, we start to look at, well, what is the dynamic of these things? Now, we have these positive and negative feedback loops. Essentially, some things are the less of this, the less of this, the less of this, the less of this, and some things are the more of this, the more of this, the more of this, the more of this. So we look at this one, missing architectural mindset for collaboration, missing strategic rituals, driving each other. The more of missing architecture, the more missing strategic rituals. The more missing strategic rituals, the more lack of strategic engagement. The more lack of strategic engagement, the more project mentality, and the more project mentality, and so on. So essentially, you could collapse this perhaps by dealing with this one, or maybe this one. And it's looking at leverage points and saying, well, what is the leverage point I need to do to intervene in this? Okay, so this is one approach. Now, I got to this level and went, okay, fine. So is this then something about organization? If there was an organization, would they be able to put an architecture and mindset for collaboration? Because collaboration isn't within their own individual organizations, it's within all 19 organizations. There isn't anywhere for them to collaborate. And these strategic rituals, this idea that you think strategically, that you have some sort of strategic view of what's going on in the world. Well, for that, you need to be above the work, to look down on it. You need to be on top of the hill. So that's what organizations do. And this poor organizational culture up here, it's out on its own. Well, is that what we're talking about? So by looking at this, by taking this view, we can start to see that maybe some sort of organization. Now, we have to remember that these people are what I would call organizationally phobic, like teenagers. They don't want to tidy their bedroom. These people do not want to be in an organization. Well, why don't they want to be in an organization? Well, because they feel that level of control, and they're kind of allergic to that control. Okay, so how do you intervene in a system? Well, luckily enough, Donella Meadows was a very, very smart lady, and she wrote this some years ago, how to intervene into a system. What's the best leverage points? Now, at the bottom, you have things like stops and flows and buffer sizes and delays and the feedback loops that we looked at. And at the top, the most effective is this mindset, the mental models, the power to transcend paradigms. And so really their mental model is that this organization is a bad thing. And yet they're feeling the consequences of no organization. And so I looked to see what would be an organizational model that would work for them, that wouldn't cause them to have the same problems. Now, I have to say at this point, I put these people through about 5 iterations of system thinking training across the organizations. And we've done regular sessions every Wednesday, and I've repeated these sessions over and over again. And one of the models I showed them was something called the viable systems model that I'll show you in a minute. But I wrapped around that the principles. Remember I said in the beginning, there were 31 underlying principles for system thinking. And it's not the approaches, it's the way of thinking. And we're dealing with just one of them here, which is the convergent divergent thinking one. And I'd shown them these principles, and I'd taught them so many times that they could almost repeat it back to me. So when it came to this, and we looked at the mental models and said, well, thinking systemically, how could we overcome this? And so we looked at this thing called viable systems model. Now, I will run a session with anyone who's interested on viable systems model. I'm not going to explain it too much, but I'll give you a very quick overview. Essentially, this took 30 years to create. This was a guy called Stafford Beer, who looked at how humans are organized and how animals are organized to just survive on the planet. And this idea that, you know, you look out and see the future environment, you see the bus coming, and then you trigger systems within your body to save your life. Coordination is running, jumping, that sort of thing. And system 3 control is more about the heartbeat and the blood flow and the adrenaline. And system 5 is whether or not you actually want to survive. And then system 1 is the jumping out of the way of the bus, for example. So this is how all viable systems are organized in life to deal with the variety that's coming at them. Now, immediately they had a problem, because immediately they were saying, well, policy, planning, audit, control, coordination, management, we hate those terms. We cannot deal with any of that language. So what we did is we changed it. And we looked at, well, system 5 then is the identity of the community. System 4 is planning and forecasting. System 3 is the efficacy of the system. System 3 star is efficacy of system. 3 is support and care, collaboration, interfacing locally, and working in the communities and organization and environment, as opposed to management or operations and environment. So suddenly they could go, well, okay, well, we can live with these. And then there became the real breakthrough, the aha moment, which is these are not jobs. These are not things. These are not roles. These are functions. In a body, in a human body, there is no hierarchy. If I asked you what the most important organ in a human body was, some would say the brain, some would say the heart, some would say the lungs, some would say the liver. Actually, they're all important. Without any of them, you can't survive. And they work together in a system. This is a system. And that system needs all of these things to work. Now, this is a really great mental model for when I go into a business and I just sit there and try and work out who does these functions and do they communicate with everybody else? Because what you have to have here, these channels are perfect communication. System 5 cannot be gods on a cloud. It can't be the board just coming down once a year to talk to the people. Really, they need to know what's going on. Otherwise, things start to go wrong and they start getting noise back from the environment. Notice how environment is still environment. They're kind of happy with that. And this idea that we exchange with the environment all the time because this is an open system. Okay, so then what we did, we drew this diagram that said, okay, so these are the 6 things of your organization. Here's you. This is what you do. Here's your system maps. And these pink things are what you're going to have to put in place to create this organization. And this they did willingly. And they took away these green things they've already got. And the pink things like find common values, functioning of scanning the environment. We're not talking enough about building back better. You see, these are things that they can do now to create this organization that allows them to start to address burnout. Because burnout is an organizational systemic problem. It's not something you can just solve. What you need to do is you need to create a different system. And that's what they've been doing. So there you go. That's using system thinking to solve a national level problem that is systemic in nature and complicated and complex, using some pretty simple and straightforward system thinking tools. Any questions? Voice is low. Can you speak loudly? Oh, I apologize for that. I thought I was speaking loudly enough. So people, now is your chance to ask me some questions. None. No questions at all. I can't believe there's no questions.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
I am Saad. Basically, we have had a word.
Hello, Saad.
So basically, my question is, I was going through the slides simultaneously, and a couple of questions is like, in the system diagram, I want to ask like, why is it in a kind of circular way? Like, what's the concept behind being it in a circular way, right? I want to ask first question this way, and the other one is altogether like, we have studied this. Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Okay, so the screen has been changed. Anyway, so we have like studied the problem solving tools, the like 5 whys and fishbone and all these Pareto and all. So I want to ask like, if I can relate the MES 89 point raised and captured with the 5 whys, can we do that? Like if there's a problem statement, then we can like 5 whys, put 5 whys tool, and then we can bring it on the fishbone or the root cause analysis, and from there on we can like put it in a brainstorming way, right? We can just bring all the root causes or all the causes on the table, and then pick and choose them as per the thing for the fishbone thing, for the root cause thing.
Okay, so firstly, let me address the fishbone.
Yeah.
The problem with the fishbone is what goes on the head of the fishbone. How do you know that you're addressing the problem? And what you're speaking of is a very mechanistic view of the world, that we can analyze a problem and we can get to a root cause. And that root cause is the thing we solve. So what's the root cause of burnout? It's an emotional state. So in the example we had, there was no way that a fishbone, you could use a fishbone or 5 whys to deal with burnout, because the people didn't have the answers that they needed. So the approach we used was about pulling out. I'm seeing an awful lot of slides here. Is there a reason for that? Okay. There, I think, do you know you're sharing your screen with us?
No, I'm sharing my screen.
There you go. Okay, so a fishbone is a very analytical tool, and it relies on knowing what goes on the head of the fish. And then you can look at the things coming off it that may or may not cause it. And it's that I'm looking for causes. With system thinking, you're going the other way. You're saying, for example, I'll give you an example that Akoff uses. If there's something wrong with my car, and I bring my car into my house, and I've never driven it, it won't start, I've never driven a car, I take the car into all of its components, every single piece, and I'm now looking at 10,000 pieces in my house. And I can analyze any one of them, and I can tell you an awful lot about the fuel injection system, and I can tell you how much it weighs and how big it is and how big the needles are, but I have no clue what its relationship is to the car. None of the pieces that I have in my house can even move themselves, let alone my whole family around. And there's no relationship between the individual component and the whole until you understand the whole. Once you understand the whole, you can look at the piece and say, I understand what that does, and now I can analyze it and I can figure out whether or not that's a problem. But without understanding the thing, I don't know what I'm looking at. Now, a fishbone doesn't give you any of that understanding. You take the problem burnout and you stick it on the head of the fish. Now what? What causes burnout? Too much work, not enough money, nothing to do with organization. There's no way you go back up the chain to go, well, the problem we're facing here is not one of components, it's one of the whole. The whole is not working for the people within it. Now, the people within it are saying, well, no, we don't want that organization rubbish. That means control, and control is bad. We have to fix this without. And they place their constraint on the solution without ever comprehending that what they're doing is working actively against finding the solution. Now, I've been into operations, for example, customer service, and they say, you must fix this in customer service. You're sharing your screen again. You must fix this in customer service because it's my budget that's paying for it. And I say, yeah, but the problem lies in sales. No, that's not my budget. I can't deal with that. Already the constraint exists that stops me fixing a systemic problem because nobody is prepared to look at the system. They want to do analysis. They want to go in because that's what we're taught. We go to school, we go to university, they break the subject down into its little components, and then they teach you the components, and from that you're supposed to get understanding. But you never do. I'll give you an example. I studied maths, and they taught me areas under curves, how to calculate an area under a curve. To this day, I have no idea why I would need to know that. It's something to do with risk. But I'm not a risk analyst, so I don't ever use it, and therefore it never made sense to me. Does that help?
Yeah. Besides, like I got like an overview or just a hint of why using system thinking rather than just a fishbone or any random tool is better. But can you like give me a comparative real life situation where I can relate or compare the fishbone or the 5 whys or other problem solving tools with the systems thinking?
Okay.
So that it's better to understand like one situation and we are solving it both ways.
Okay, so let me go back to the slide.
Sure.
And I'll show you a slide that I went past quite quickly.
Sure.
And then we can, I'll explain it a little more clearly. This one. Sorry. Okay, this one. In system 2, in level 2 working, which is what you're talking about, you get a problem, and then you assume that it's a closed environment. You do your fishbone, you do your analysis, and you get a solution, or you get to a root cause, which may or may not be the problem solver, and you solve it. And then probably your problem comes up somewhere else. In system thinking, what you're saying is, we do diagnosis, we open up the whole world, and we understand exactly where all these things are coming from. And then we'll do our analysis. We may then know what to write on the head of the fishbone. But before we do the convergent thinking, before we do this, and we get everything out, we can't do analysis. Analysis is this one over here. This is information through convergent thinking, and fishbone is exactly one of those. Fishbone is an analytical tool, so is 5 whys. It's reductive because you can't get to the knowledge you need through analysis. Analysis will take you down a path for sure, but how do you know that you're looking at the right thing? I always used to say system thinking, Six Sigma is like a microscope, like an electron microscope. And you can look at the dust on the carpet and the things on the dust, and you can analyze and analyze and analyze and analyze. Should you be looking at the carpet? Well, we don't know. We don't know where we should be looking. And so the challenge I give you with the traditional analytical tools is, how do you even know where you should be looking? I see Susie put her hand up. I'm just going to stop share. I'll come to you, Henry, in just a second. Susie.
Hi, so I'm a chief exec of a small, medium-sized social enterprise, and I facilitate my guys making decisions non-stop. We're fairly agile, we move quite quickly, we're in healthcare, so we've had to move quite quickly. So you sort of blow my head a little bit, because you're sort of saying, right, well, you can't make decisions around issues on a regular basis without looking at the whole and looking at the complex whole. Whereas I understand, I get that, I get the bigger picture and making decisions and breaking it down as a whole, as a bigger system. But on a day-to-day basis, how do you apply that process and that logic when you're working in such an agile and fast environment?
Okay, great question. This is a mindset. This is not a tool set. So I tend to think like this. For me, this is easy. For me, this is like, I don't know, the way I do work. And a lot of people are not taught this way, or a lot of people, I think the easiest answer is to learn the 31 principles, and I can show you those. But the way of thinking is key here. It's not the tools that are important, which is why I haven't really focused on the tools or explained them. I've just demonstrated here's a systemic approach to dealing with a massive systemic problem. But I understand what you're saying. There are an awful lot of things in day-to-day life which are obvious, right? You look at them and you go, well, I'll just do that. Yes, do it. But then there are other things which are a lot more complex. And it's really complex, messy problems. Now, in every organization, you have a whole bunch of people, and those people are open systems. They do what they want, they work anywhere they want, they don't follow processes, they break stuff, they hide stuff, and depending on how you lead them depends on how open they are to tell you anything. Can you make errors, for example? How costly is that error? Is that error going to cost me my job, my life, somebody else's life? Or is it actually something that nobody really cares about, that I can just admit? If only I could admit I make mistakes. That's the systemic problem. That's a complex, messy, systemic problem right there. And yet you might not see it that way because somebody's made an error, and I do this with people who make errors. And yet, if you thought about it systemically, you might deal with it in a different way. You might want to just take a step back and say, who am I? How do I deal with life? Well, these people are responding to me. You're still muted.
Yeah. So I suppose. I suppose I work on patterns in that case. My brain works on patterns, so I will work quickly and agilely and fast if there's not a pattern. If there's a more of a pattern of behaviour or a pattern of mistakes or a pattern of incidents, then that's when I take I go bigger and I go a whole picture as opposed to working on the hoof, as it were. So I get what you're saying. The messiness is more complex. I like mess, I have to say, so I should probably sit in it more often.
What I would say to do is to get above the argument level, to draw down what everybody knows and just put it on a page and say, right, we all know this to be the thing, right? Somebody else is sharing their slides again. You need to stop sharing slides, whoever that is. There we go. So get above the argument level, and that's really what getting all this stuff out on the table does. It gets you above the argument level and go, this is what we understand about the whole. Because a lot of people think that we all know this, right? And this is often the first thing I do when I go into an organization is I draw a picture that everybody says they know. And then you'd be really surprised at how many people didn't know stuff. I work for an organization and they have something called a comfort model. Doesn't matter what it is, but everybody talks about it. And everybody uses that term and nobody knew what it was. And they all thought they knew what it was until I drew it for them and they went, oh, right, that explains why I have all these problems. And I thought it meant this, and I was always confused about these other people who talked about it in a different way. I drew the calculation for AIG to calculate how much money they need to hold. And there were actuaries and accountants, and they were calculating this thing in a different way. And when the actuaries gave the accountants a number, the accountants added 42 to it, because then it would work for them in their calculation. And they never questioned why they had to add this adjustment factor, and it was always 42. Well, the reason it was 42 was because they were calculating two different things. And when the accountants calculated themselves, they got a different answer. But they got the same answer when they added 42, so that's what they did. And this is how life works. People do the thing they do and they think that they do the right thing until somebody gets above it all and stands on the hill and says, okay, so what are we doing? Just explain to me how this thing works. Yeah, we all know, I know, let's write it on a board in 4 boxes. We acquire customers, we maintain customers, we enhance customers, and we get them to pay for stuff, right? Those 4 things is what we do to actually make money. Okay, fine. Do we all agree with that? Right, now we've got a shared vision. Now we've got a placeholder that we can hang everything off and say, we all know that to be true, therefore this is also true. And it's getting above the argument level that really helps you now. So being agile and being quick to make decisions, and the challenge I would give you is, if you've got a 5% error rate in all those decisions you make, every time you make another decision based on the previous decision, you compound the error. So your 5% plus 5% plus 5% plus 5%, you could be a million miles away by the end. And without taking stock of that 5% error, you don't know whether you're right or wrong, because you're basing things on assumptions, because you're having to go so fast. So for your own sanity, get a picture of everything just on a page that everybody agrees with, so you know what's impacted by that decision you're making. So you can make a decision about, is it worth investing more time in this? Is this an underlying symptom that we need to be looking at that's actually pointing to a whole different systemic problem later on? And then other stuff won't go wrong. And some of those things you're solving won't happen in the first place. Does that help? Okay, cool. Henry. Henry said, having had several experiences of how business cultures are influenced by individual countries, I was intrigued by the example you gave. I'm guessing Romania, would you conclude that the same organizational improvement methodologies are effective as a broad brush, regardless of the country's culture? Okay, very quickly, this worked in that environment for those people with those particular issues. I might do something different, although I would always get the mess out on the table. So I would always do this thing I call an operational review, because it just works and it allows people to unburden themselves. What happened next, it depends. It depends entirely on who I'm talking to and what challenges they're giving me in terms of how I would address those challenges. So in this case, I knew kind of early on that they were allergic to organization. And from that gave me several thoughts on how I can address this. What I was aware of was there was a lot of political interference in the problem, and that political interference wasn't helpful. So to get above that really was what I was aiming for. Now, once I'd done that, it was really a case of taking them on the journey that I'd already discovered. I used to call that manipulation, but I don't know if it is. It's probably a better term for it than manipulation, but I don't know. When you already kind of know what the answer is, and if you know patterns, you've seen the pattern before, it kind of seeds your thinking that, oh, it's pattern A. And if it's pattern A, then this is the kind of stuff that I do for pattern A. That may be wrong, and which is that convergent divergent thinking. You may diverge towards your chosen approach, which could be wrong, and you might have to go back out again if you get to a dead end, or if you get to an answer that doesn't feel like it's going to work for you. And there is an awful lot of this that's not obvious. It's about experience and it's about knowledge. I think one of the challenges we have is this resistance to accept expertise based on people's experience rather than people's book learning. So if you've been there and you've seen it, you kind of know what you're facing, but it's very difficult to bring people along that journey and say, well, look, I've done it here, 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 and here, and it was those things. When they're faced with this one time that they've experienced this, and they've already made their mind up that it's this guy or this thing, and it's that undoing that mental model that they've created. And again, the leverage points that we're talking about right at the far right, which is mental models, overcoming paradigms, overcoming their commonly held belief that this is the guy that's the problem, or this is the thing that's the problem. Does that help, Henry? Henry, can you not oh, I can unmute you. There you go, I've unmuted you.
Thanks, Adam. Hang on, I'll just start the video. Yeah, thanks, Adam. No, I'm really, it's very interesting. I think it's refreshing not to just someone come out and say, well, we're going to use this particular methodology or this toolkit. It is entirely about understanding all the subjective issues in the mess and then coming up with some sort of methodology to put that into tangible stuff that resolves the key drivers. I'm very, very, very pleased to hear that. It's very interesting.
Yeah, there's no methodology in system thinking. I mean, there's plenty of approaches.
There's no prescribed methodology.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's what you need somebody who understands system thinking to help you, essentially, on this journey, right? And we're
it's that cross paradigm approach. Yeah. I mean, you've got all the subjective stuff, all the objective stuff. So you've got the closed stuff and the open stuff. And it's just getting all that noise and mess and subjectivity and collating it and looking for the common themes. And no, it's really cool. It's really cool. I like it.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, it can be taught, don't get me wrong, but there are also challenges to that. So, for example, the Open University teaches system thinking and has done since the 50s. They really struggle to create system thinkers. And I've met dozens of system thinkers who've read every single book and can quote you chapter and verse and swear to God that they're right, which is the least system thinking thing you can do, because everybody's got their own perspective.
You've got to get the concept that there is no right way to do it. And then I think what comes out of it is that you didn't come up with 100% solution for this particular situation. You came up with some improvements that will make it better.
Well, I came up with an approach that they can now adopt to end up at a destination. And the destination is an organization, which I believe will seriously help them, because it's based in this viable systems model. This is how life is organized, and therefore it's the most likely solution to the problem that you have, which is people are burning out. Why are they burning out? Because they're running against treacle. They're running against all the time. They're struggling to achieve anything. And by that struggling to achieve, they're burning out. They're not getting the energy feedback that they need. They're like the band on stage singing to an empty room. They're putting their all out there and it's just disappearing into a void.
It's a funny thing, and I don't want to hijack this, but I've seen the variation in country cultures makes a huge impact.
Absolutely.
That people react to hierarchy effectively, and just the sort of their I maintain that on a basic level, people are motivated in two ways. They either fear the repercussions of not doing something, or they feel they want to do it, and it's sort of transitioning those two things is the ideal, but that is hugely influenced by individual country cultures and history. So yeah, really interesting.
There's also a conceptual thinking pre-requirement to doing system thinking.
Yeah.
So an awful lot of people can't think conceptually. They don't know they can't think conceptually, but the idea that if I say something to you and you think, oh, I could use that somewhere else, that ability to transcend what you've been told. And I guess the teller is when somebody says, what do you want me to do? As opposed to, yeah, leave me alone. I've got this. So and system thinking very much relies on that ability to take a concept and then smash it up even and go, that bit is brilliant and I'm going to use it there, or, oh, I can use that whole thing mixed with this thing over here, smash it together and to make this other thing. I call it tool makers versus tool users. An awful lot of people are tool users and they just want a process. Give me the process, give me the methodology I need to follow.
Give me the bullet.
To achieve the outcome you've achieved, and make it repeatable and make it a standard approach that I can do every time and I can get my mate to do and I can get 20 graduates to do. It's like, this is not how thinking works. And the other thing with system thinking is it's called thinking for a reason. You can't commoditize thinking, right? You can't say, well, package it up as a solution that I can train a bunch of graduates to, and then we can do system thinking in the world.
By rote.
I think I saw recently SAFE, which is the agile way. It's like an approach to doing agile. Point number 2 is do system thinking. Well, what do you mean do system thinking? What, all of us? Which of the 20 approaches are you talking about? What do you mean do system thinking? It's a nothing term. And then ironically, agile is a system thinking approach to dealing with stuff. It's this idea that people self-organize given the opportunity. But self-organization in itself isn't enough, because ironically, we've got this thing called entropy. And as people self-organize and move away from entropy, the organization that they're in moves towards entropy. As they self-organize and become more cliquey and more kingdoms and more fiefdoms, the organization as a whole suffers and becomes more chaotic and moves towards entropy. As you organize the organization and get it into processes and get it into standard forms, the people move towards entropy. So what businesses have to get their heads around is balancing what we call entropy with emergence. stuff emerges from these systems that you create. What is that? And what's happening with emergence? Are your people moving towards entropy, or is your organization moving towards entropy? And balancing those two things on this knife edge so that you have what you need to move forward and to have the most optimal solution. Now, you know if your people are moving towards entropy because you have high attrition, high absence, high sickness, your people are leaving in droves. And you know your organization is moving towards entropy because it's chaos here. You feel it, you live in it, it's absolute nightmare. And I've got to talk to 20 people to get anything done. And if I need a meeting, well, 50 people turn up and nobody speaks.
Yeah, no, mate, we could do this all day. I better stop.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Adam. Good to meet
you. Okay, so we have 13 minutes left and I'm looking forward to more questions. So come on, you lovely people. Oh, John. Hello, John. I'm unmuting you now, hopefully. You can unmute you, can you?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Adam.
Oh, there you go. Cool.
A couple of observations, really.
Go for it.
You said that, well, you look at service organisations rather than manufacturing. I basically work fundamentally in manufacturing, but I worked in Buckingham and came across a guy called John Seddon.
You're going to trigger me now, aren't you?
He just talks about failure demand all the time.
Yeah.
His consultancy, which is Vanguard, be very reluctant to deal with an organisation unless they were going in at the top. So I just wondered if there was any parallel.
No, there isn't. Can I? So I have a bit of a John Seddon story. For those who don't know John Seddon, he's written several books with system thinking in the title, and he's claimed system thinking as one of his things, basically. Unfortunately, John doesn't understand system thinking, and we know this because I was at one of his book signings called System Thinking in the Public Sector, and he came to me and asked if he knew me. And I said, no, but you know a friend of mine. And I told him that I was mentored by a chap called Jeff Elliott. And Jeff had dinner with John 3 days before. And John had basically admitted he didn't understand system thinking or anything about it. And in his own book signing in London, he walked up to me and we had this conversation, and he put his hands in the air and he said, I don't know anything about system thinking. And he ran out of his own book signing with me shouting after him, why is your book called System Thinking in the Public Sector then, John? So I really struggle with John Seddon because he's a self-publicist, and what I talk about is system thinking. What he talks about is his own methodology for his Vanguard consultants. This idea that you can commoditize system thinking and then sell it to somebody as a thing. And every organization we go in and we do these things really is a complete fallacy. So if anybody's ever talking to you about system thinking methodology, really that they're not talking about system thinking, they're talking about something else.
Okay.
As I've said, there is no methodology. There are over 20 approaches, and which one you use depends entirely on what you need.
Yes.
And knowing which one to use is part of our skill. And knowing when you don't know is an even bigger skill. So if I don't know something, if I don't know how to do something, I know that I don't have the right approach or I don't have enough information. I don't think that I failed in some way. I just think, oh, I haven't discovered this, how cool. And I get really curious about how it is to go and do these things. But what these organizations tend to have to do is to train a whole bunch of people in a methodology and then implement that methodology everywhere they go.
Yeah.
And we see this with lean a lot, you know, here's 5 lean tools, go and do this to that organization. And of course, it's always a terrible thing to do. So yeah, John Seddon is one of my favorite triggers, if I'm honest with you.
And the other thing was I learned theory of constraints before I learned lean. And I'm grateful for that, for understanding that way around. So Ellie Goldratt would took my management team and we did a sort of post-it note. What are the top 10 problems in the company? And then did an affinity diagram.
Yeah.
He calls this undesirable effects. And then he has another method called an evaporating cloud, which takes the core problem, examines the relationships between them, and basically reorientates your thinking. I think that's very clever, although I've never been able to do it myself.
Okay.
Because people want immediacy, they want results really quickly, and they're not prepared to, or patient enough to explore.
So actually, conversely, one of my challenges has been solving problems too fast.
Right.
Because when you think systemically, the answer's often really obvious, and no one else has seen it. And it's not that I'm bragging about that. It's just that you have a different perspective, and often solving problems is about taking a different perspective. This is why you bring in external consultants. If you bring in the right ones and not the obvious usual suspects, then what they do is they ask you all the questions that you think you'd already asked, but you haven't.
Right.
And that's those questions that tell you, oh my God, it's really straightforward. Actually, this is obvious. And then you can kick that person out. And often that's what happens. I've done a 6-month project in a week before, because they just haven't asked the right question.
Yeah.
And the simple question, I had one with Vodafone where they couldn't build servers fast enough. And they needed 800 servers a month to fill this is globally. And when I asked them, well, how do you build servers? And there was a 3 whiteboard process for building servers, and it takes 6 months. And I asked the question, well, how many of those are virtual? All of them. Well, why don't you just give me a guy who builds virtual servers and clear up some rack space, and I'll build you 800 virtual servers now. Never even occurred to them to do that. They always followed the process. No people in, and what happened was McKinsey had come in and distributed this process across the world. So nobody actually did it. It had been just dissolved, atomized, so that it was free to the business. But of course, nobody was responsible for it. And nobody was responsible for knowing the whole thing and going, hang on, this is crazy. Why are we doing all this work when all we have to actually do is have somebody sat there building servers? So one guy could do a whole month's work on his own, sat at a desk next to me in 3 days.
Very good.
But it's actually quite embarrassing because it's so obvious. And you say, well, this is really, really not, it's not a complicated problem. Why have you spent 2 years trying to figure it out? Because they were trying to optimize this process. They've gone in and they were saying, can we remove any of these steps? Well, no, because we must. And that theory of constraints, funnily enough, they placed all these constraints on solving the problem.
Yeah. The other thing was an observation about Donella Meadows' work.
Yeah.
So I've read quite a lot of her stuff, and I remember her saying that the list is tentative and the order is slippery.
Absolutely.
So although, so, and the other thing was,
absolutely nothing is prescriptive here.
No.
What it is all inference. It's all about, if you think about it in these ways, it will help you to perceive the world more systemically. Now, to think about, well, changing the mindset of the situation is about changing the perspective, is about getting rid of all the stuff that you think you know and reframing it. And once you reframe it, sometimes it's not a problem at all. Sometimes it's something else. And sometimes it's an opportunity. Sometimes the most painful things are lessons that you need to learn. That's why they're painful.
Yeah. The final thing is a little bit more flippant. You mentioned the actuaries and the accountants, and the actuaries of the accountants added 42.
Yeah.
Whatever number. I think that's a Douglas Adams issue.
It is, yeah. It's a Douglas admiral. I thought that at the time. It was. That's why I can remember the number, because it's the answer to the question.
The answer to everything.
Yeah, it is the answer to everything. Yeah, it was just so. It was at the time. It was very funny.
Yeah.
And I said, of course it's 42. Why would you not? It's like it's the answer to everything. And they all thought so too. It was the strangest thing that once you identify this thing as being funny, then they all start to look at each other and go, why do we do that?
Why do we do it?
Why do we do that? Well, yes, quite. Why do you do that? And the funny thing was, when I sat them down, they didn't even speak the same language. Actuaries and accountants use completely different terminology for the same thing. And I didn't know what either of them was talking about. And so I had to say, look, we are going to speak in English. If you can't give me that explanation in English, don't use the acronym. You don't know enough. So don't say anything. And only the ones who understood the things could talk. And they had to explain it to me in English. And I'm not a finance genius. But once they explained it to me so I understood it and I could draw it on a board, it became really obvious that what they were doing was calculating two completely different things. They thought that they were doing the same thing, but they didn't talk to each other, because there's snobbery and there's also, you know, this them and us, and there's also this language differentiator.
Yes.
That they have their club and their club speak. And it's understanding how that communication is so critical. So I've got 2 minutes left, and I just want to say one thing to the group, if I may. Are you okay, John? You good?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. So I'm just going to say one thing to the group. One of the things that struck me about COVID and the current world is that we have a lack of interaction within businesses. So we used to have what we call water cooler conversations, or in an organization where I worked, a single kitchen where everyone would turn up at some point in the day and have coffee, and they would meet people and they'd have conversations. And those people having conversations would sometimes make decisions based on those conversations, and it would facilitate the business, and the business rely on these informal conversations, these interactions that happen all the time, just to function. Because so many processes don't exist. They're just conversations that people have when they're in the coffee room. Oh, I see him again. I have that conversation about the finance or about whatever. And people learn about their environment. I've now been talking to organizations where the head of finance has only spoken to 5 people since lockdown, since February. The 5 people he needs to talk to. He has no idea what's going on in the organization. He only has 5 points of contact with the 5 things he needs to talk about. And when I spoke to HR and about the head of finance, oh, I only talk to him when I need to know something about the credit card. I said, but I used to see you all the time at the desk talking. Yeah, we'd be talking and having coffee and sharing chocolate and all those things. All of those interactions are not happening now. And the lack of interactions really is causing me some concern, because I can't see how this can be sustainable for organizations in the long term. That if people are going to work from home, they must have social interactions, and there must be some way of creating that engagement across the organization with each other that they used to have. These friendships aren't existing anymore. These people are only dealing with the people that they need to be dealing with. And that's a real threat, I think, to the way that business are going to work in the future. Okay, final, it's actually time, but if anybody wants to ask any questions or come back to me, I think you can get my contact through Suslence. I look forward to connecting with all of you. I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to send me a connection request, and I'll connect with all of you. And we can continue these conversations whenever you like. I love talking about this stuff, as you can probably gather. And yeah, thank you very much for your patience and your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aaron Wolves. It was really a great session. Like, we went under the impression that problem-solving tools are just the right way out to deal with problems and implement the best practices or the best solutions to get through. But after this, like, it feels like, yeah, there is one more step ahead, and having the holistic approach, or having the system thinking and having the system thinking approach will be.
Sorry, could I could I just interrupt you because I've had a question from Faisal?
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay, Faisal?
Yeah, sure,
if I address your question, I might run over time, but this is really important. Faisal's asked, organizations struggle due to hierarchy vis-a-vis silos. As rightly said, human body does not have hierarchy. Wondering what would be your suggestion for organization to follow in the post-COVID time? Faisal, can you go off mute and we'll have that conversation? Where are you? Is that Miriam? You have to put your hand up because I don't. Ah, there you go. Ah, sorry. There we go. I'm doing it. Ooh, unmute. There we go. Does that work?
Thank you.
Faisal.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adam. Yeah, what wonderful session and very nice hearing you out today. I'm personally on a journey starting from bottom up. Industrial engineering, manufacturing, Six Sigma, lean, and today's systems thinking. Yeah.
Me too.
I was really delighted when you said that human body does not have an hierarchy per se. So I'm just wondering that what is your suggestion for organization in post-COVID world?
Okay.
Especially when we talk about, you know, silos all the time. Thank you very much.
I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to take you back to the viable systems model, because really what we're talking about is viable systems model. So I'm going to do a session on this. If anybody's interested, I'm sure Suslence will give us this opportunity. Let me go to it. There we go. This is what we're talking about. So this is how all living organisms are organized, that these levels of management, and we call this system 1 to system 5 in VSM. Now, what happens in organizations is you see some of these systems not communicating with other systems. For example, if I just go through them, policy is who we are, planning is the senses, is the ability to look out and horizon scan and to see the threats and opportunities coming, often completely missing. System 3 is the control, is the allocation of resources across the organization. System 3 star audit is checking the allocation of resources to see whether or not it's being organized. I was going to say, I'd say effectively rather than efficiently. They ignore efficiency because efficiency is not a human term, it's a mechanical term, but effective is. So in the body, system 3 star audit is that one that goes, yeah, if you're beating your heart, don't beat it too fast. Not too much adrenaline, let's make sure we don't poison ourselves. It's knowing what the system can cope with, the whole system can cope with, and making sure that these guys together aren't overstressing the system. System 2 coordination is this running, jumping, leaping, balancing, the ability to coordinate, knowing which muscles you need to twitch to do various things. And system 1 management is the doing, is the operation, is the interacting with the environment. So in a body, it's this. So I would argue that a viable systems model is a really, really good place to start. Now, what you won't see on here is IT. You won't see finance. You won't see HR. You won't see the board. You won't see area management. You won't see any of those things. You just see functions that have to happen. And it's these functions working together in a synergy that makes the thing work. If any one of these doesn't communicate with the other because they don't like each other or whatever, then things start to go wrong. So the simple answer is take this as a model and start to look at organizations through this lens, because you'll very quickly see where they're going wrong. What you will see a lot of, I mean, if I take a hospital in COVID times. So system 4 planning saw COVID coming in the UK back in February, January, February, right? Said, oh, there's a pandemic coming in the future. And they went to the system 3 and said, right, there's a pandemic coming. We're going to need PPE. We're going to need respirators. We're going to need all these things, you know, make sure we've got them in the organization. System 5 said, no, don't worry about that. The government's got that. You don't have to worry your heads about that. The government will tell us when we need all that stuff, and, you know, don't worry. Oh, okay. COVID arrives. System 1 starts dying. It gets overwhelmed, it starts dying, and then System 5 goes to the government and goes, where's my PPE? Where's all this stuff? And the government say, what now? PPE? Oh, right. Oh, okay, let's get PPE. In the meantime, tell these guys to reuse the PPE and to try and make it last as long as possible. Then they start dying even more. So very quickly, you see, System 4 planning had been outsourced to the government. And that wasn't done in hospitals. They weren't allowed to do their own planning. They weren't allowed to do their own buying of PPE. It had to come through some centralized controlled mechanism that wasn't up to the job. And therefore System 1 started to die and get overwhelmed. And meanwhile, System 5 is just scratching its head saying, well, you know, that's what we were told to do. An abdication of responsibility. And what you saw was a failure of System 5, a failure of System 4, and a failure of System 3 as well. So management failure within the hospital. Okay, fine. Well, how would you fix that? Well, why is not the hospital going on Amazon and buying PPE? Why are they not taking care of their own needs? Why are they not saying, well, whatever you think, I'm just going to do this? Well, because there's a big organization sat above them which is stopping them doing that. Does that help?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, good example. Yeah.
So yeah, viable systems model is quite a cool way to just think about your world. It's just a frame to see your world through. Now, if anybody ever wants to do this with their organization, give me a shout.
Sure. I've already shared. I've already shoot out the LinkedIn request to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I love doing this stuff. It's such good fun, and it asks great questions.
We will keep in touch. Thank you, Adam.
Okay, no worries. There we go. Sorry, Sard, back to you.
Yeah, so it was a great session indeed. So like we got the holistic idea of overview or the idea of systems thinking, and hopefully like we'll be using the same in the CEP and further on like in the program and all. So anyone with any other questions, or we can like wind up now?
I think we're all good. Again, if anybody wants to talk, I'm really happy to talk about this or pretty much anything else. I love to talk. So I'm always available for a chat or a debate or an argument, if you like.
Perfect. All right. So anyone who doesn't know about like Adam Walls is one of the speakers at Certified Employability Professionals Program that Suslence Research is going to start with from 10 Jan onwards. So the theme is basically to bridge the gap between employability and deployability. And these are some of the key skills or the life skills that we are working on so as to bridge that gap, right? So yeah, and I'll just share my screen with the other session. Yeah. So the next session we have is of Dr. Barbara, who will be talking about why making mistakes is the superpower of learning. So yeah, we'll be seeing you all in the next session. For today, I think it's time, right? So it's already 7:45 IST.
Yes, overran. I do apologize.
No issues, no issues. It was a great session indeed. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers.